The wilderness hides beauty and terror in equal measure, and no one truly knows what waits beyond the tree line. From the sudden Kodiak River ambush that threw a lifelong friendship into chaos, to the icy Svalbard tundra, where a polar bear struck a group of snowmobilers without warning. In this video, you'll witness 6 encounters that show how quickly nature can turn awe into fear, testing courage, instincts, and survival against unimaginable odds. The Lebedev family had planned their autumn trip into the wilderness for months, hoping to catch the taiga at its most beautiful. When the early snowflakes began to dust the dark spruce trees and the air smelled of frost and pine resin, it was October 2nd, 2025. Nikolai and Irina wanted to give their 2 children a break from the noise of Vladivostok, to show them what the real forest felt like, silent and endless and alive with the breath of the wild. With them came their longtime friend Dmitry, who had hunted and camped in Ussuri Krai many times before and knew the region's isolation, its long valleys, and the rivers that ran cold even in late summer. They parked their rented RV deep within the woods, near a quiet stretch of river, miles from any paved road, surrounded by tracks of elk and wild boar in the snow-dusted mud. The day passed peacefully, with the sun low and golden between the trees. The forest was still except for the chatter of magpies and the faint rustle of wind through frozen branches. Nikolai gathered firewood while Irina unpacked the small kitchen area, storing food in the cupboards and setting aside some meat for dinner. Dmitry checked the generator and made sure the heating worked properly, since the nights in early October could already drop below freezing. Inside the RV, the smell of cooked food began to spread, a scent of warmth and comfort in the cold wilderness, but one that carried far beyond what anyone realized. By evening, the family sat inside, tired but content. Outside, the sky dimmed to a dull gray, and snow fell in thin curtains over the taiga, settling lightly on the moss and branches. The children, restless after the long day, put on their coats and went out to play near the riverbank, where the water moved lazily between chunks of ice forming at the edges. They threw pebbles, watched them skip across the surface, and laughed in the still air, their voices echoing faintly between the trees. From the clearing, they could see the warm glow of the RV's windows, unaware that something else was already watching them from the shadowed edge of the forest. The Russian grizzly had been roaming the area for several days, drawn down from the higher slopes by the first snows. Its fat stores were not yet enough for hibernation, and hunger made it bold. It had followed scents carried on the wind, traces of smoke, cooked food, and movement, until it came upon the clearing, where the RV stood like a strange white animal among the trees. Its nose twitched at the strong smell of meat inside, and its dark eyes fixed on the metal shell that separated it from what it wanted. It circled silently at first, testing the air, then moved closer, its paws sinking softly into the thin layer of snow. Inside, Nikolai had just begun to clear the table when the first sound came, a heavy thud against the side panel that made the whole vehicle tremble. Irina looked up sharply, and Dmitry turned toward the noise, thinking perhaps a branch had fallen. But then came another blow, louder, violent, and the wall shuddered inward. Before they could react, the bear reared up and slammed its weight against the door, splintering the latch. The sound was deafening, metal bending and wood cracking as the creature forced its way inside, driven by hunger and confusion. The children outside froze when they heard the crash. From where they stood by the river, they saw the RV shake violently, saw one of its panels crumple under the blow, and then the shape of the bear as it forced its way through. The air filled with chaos, the shattering of glass, the crash of overturned furniture, and the dull, heavy sounds of impact that echoed horribly through the clearing. Inside, Nikolai tried to grab a metal pan, striking at the bear as it surged forward, but the animal's size and power were beyond anything they could stop. It swiped once, the blow throwing him backward into the counter, and Irina screamed as Dmitry tried to reach for the hunting knife he kept near the stove. The bear lunged again, hitting him squarely, sending him crashing against the table, which splintered under his weight. Irina tried to shield herself, backing toward the far wall, but the bear's claws tore through the narrow space, smashing everything in its path. Outside, the children screamed, their voices thin and broken in the cold air. They could see their parents inside, could see the dark mass of the animal thrashing through the cramped space, overturning chairs and dragging things down in a frenzy of movement and sound. The RV rocked violently, and one of its side windows shattered outward, scattering shards into the snow. The bear, crazed by scent and noise, struck again and again until the sounds inside began to fade, replaced only by the heavy panting of the animal and the crackling of the broken furniture beneath it. When the bear finally retreated, its muzzle dark with blood and its breath steaming in the cold, it lumbered back toward the tree line, disappearing slowly between the trunks as if nothing had happened. The clearing fell silent except for the faint hiss of snow against the RV's twisted metal and the sobs of the children who still stood by the river, too terrified to move. Hours later, when the Rangers arrived after being alerted by a faint distress signal sent from Dimitri's phone before the attack, they found the RV half collapsed, its walls torn, and the interior wrecked. Inside lay the bodies of the 3 adults, the scene silent except for the hum of the wind through the broken window. The children were found nearby, cold and in shock, their faces pale and streaked with tears, unable to speak at first. The investigation later confirmed the tracks of a large Russian grizzly leading away from the site toward the northern ridge. Authorities reinforced new protocols for food storage and vehicle reinforcement in remote parts of Ussuri, warning travelers to never leave cooked meat or scraps inside unsealed cabins or RVS during early winter when bears were still active. The forest returned to silence soon after, the snow covering the marks of what had happened. But the memory of that night stayed with those who entered the taiga, a reminder that in those endless woods, hunger and instinct still ruled, and that even the strongest walls could shatter beneath the weight of nature's power. The morning mist hung thick over the Carpathian forest on September 21, 2022, cloaking the towering pines and dense undergrowth in a pale silvery veil, and the air carried the faint scent of damp earth and fallen leaves. Wildlife handler Alexei Novak moved carefully along the narrow dirt path toward Bruno's enclosure, his boots pressing into the soft soil that still held traces of overnight rain. For years, Alexei had raised Bruno, a brown bear born in captivity and abandoned as a cub, nurturing him with painstaking care, feeding him by hand, and teaching him to trust humans in a world where instinct ruled over reason. He had never felt fear near the massive animal. He had known every nuance of Bruno's movements, every gesture that marked calm, curiosity, or irritation. That morning, Alexei carried his usual supplies: food for Bruno, cleaning tools, and medication, expecting the familiar routine. The bear greeting him at the gate with a lumbering, affectionate shuffle, perhaps reaching a paw in recognition or nuzzling his shoulder with the weight of massive trust. The sun filtered weakly through the mist, casting long, thin rays across the forest floor and glinting off the steel bars of the enclosure. Birds stirred in the treetops, and the faint hum of insects mixed with the gurgle of a nearby stream. Alexei walked slowly, speaking softly, accustomed to the quiet harmony of mornings spent with Bruno. Still, as he reached the enclosure gate and glanced toward the bear's figure, he felt an unusual tension ripple through the air. Bruno stood slightly apart, ears tilted back, muscles coiled, and eyes glinting not with curiosity, but with something foreign and unreadable. Alexei froze, heart skipping a beat, but dismissed the feeling, thinking the bear had simply grown restless in the early light, as animals sometimes did before the sun fully warmed the day. He stepped inside, the metal gate swinging closed behind him with a soft clang. Bruno had always been gentle in these moments, moving slowly, sniffing Alexei's hand or nudging his shoulder with a paw as he worked. But this morning was different. Without warning, the bear lunged, his massive body accelerating with a terrifying speed that belied his size. Alexei's mind struggled to comprehend what was happening. The bear he had raised, the creature he had fed and guided for years, now charged not with playfulness, but with a raw, feral intensity that erased every memory of trust. The world seemed to tilt as Alexei stumbled backward, barely managing to raise a hand. Still, the bear's momentum carried him forward, slamming Alexei into the steel wall of the enclosure with a force that reverberated through bone and muscle. Tools and food containers were scattered across the concrete floor, clanging against steel and stone as Bruno swiped and pivoted, each movement precise, yet devastatingly powerful. Pain exploded through Alexei's shoulder and ribs as he fell beneath the bear's weight, the air hissing out of his lungs in sharp, agonized bursts. He tried to push back, to reach for the heavy broom he kept near the cleaning station, but Bruno's massive paw pinned him to the ground, claws scraping along the metal and concrete, shredding wood and canvas nearby. For a terrifying instant, Alexei's mind went blank, disbelief freezing him in a mixture of shock and fear. This was not possible, he thought. His years of care, the bond built slowly over countless hours, counted for nothing in the face of brute force and primal instinct. Outside the enclosure, colleagues heard the alarms triggered automatically by the movement sensors and the sudden, unnatural sounds that shattered the morning calm. Shouts of warning and panic carried through the mist as several handlers rushed to the perimeter, activating remote sirens and releasing distraction devices. The piercing noise startled Bruno, breaking his focus just enough to pull him back from Alexei, though the bear remained tense and unpredictable, pacing in short, sharp bursts, growling low and rumbling through his chest with an intensity that shook the steel bars. Alexei, bleeding and battered, rolled away from the worst of the impact, every breath a labor, every movement causing fresh pain along his bruised and torn muscles. As he pressed himself against the wall, trying to draw air and hold back panic, he felt the weight of what had happened pressed down heavier than the bear's claws or teeth ever could. Survival was merely physical. The emotional wound carved by betrayal, by the sudden collapse of trust, cut far deeper. Years of patient feeding, gentle handling, and careful observation had been undone in a heartbeat by forces neither he nor anyone could control, reminding him that even when nurtured from infancy, a wild creature could never escape its instincts entirely. Bruno, once a symbol of trust and loyalty, had become a reminder of the razor-thin line between harmony and disaster in the natural world. Paramedics arrived quickly, navigating the slick paths through the mist and forest, and pulled Alexei from the enclosure, careful to avoid further provoking the massive bear, which now lingered near the far corner, watching with sharp, dark eyes. His injuries were extensive, bruises covering the torso and limbs, a fractured shoulder, deep lacerations along his arms and hands, where he had tried to shield himself, and a shock that left his body trembling despite adrenaline. Colleagues reassured themselves that Alexei would survive, but as he was carried to the waiting vehicle, it was clear that the psychological impact would linger far longer than the wounds themselves. In the days that followed, wildlife authorities reviewed the incident carefully. Bruno was sedated and relocated temporarily to a larger reinforced enclosure, with experts noting that even habituated animals could revert to aggression unpredictably, particularly if stressed, confused, or sensing subtle changes in routine. Alexei, meanwhile, recovered physically, but carried the memory of the attack in every waking moment, the sensation of massive claws pinning him. This violent force bent steel and tore tools, the piercing betrayal of a creature he had loved as he would a child. Sleep came fitfully, haunted by the image of Bruno's eyes, wild and unflinching, and the sudden, irrepressible knowledge that nature, even nurtured, could never truly be tamed. The forest slowly returned to its misty calm, birds and small animals resuming their morning routines. But for Alexei Novak, the sound of rustling leaves or distant cracking branches carried a sharpened edge of fear and respect, a reminder that the line between care and catastrophe, trust and violence, was never more than a heartbeat apart. Bruno remained alive, a creature still bound by instinct, and Alexei understood that the bond they had built, though real, could not override the raw, unpredictable power of the wild. The morning of July 29, 2020, broke over Kodiak Island with a misty light that filtered weakly through the dense coastal forest, casting the river in a pale, almost ethereal glow. Lifelong friends Marcus Hale and Ethan Cole had grown up in nearby towns, spending every summer since childhood exploring these waterways, tracking salmon runs, and learning to read the rhythms of the island's remote rivers. That day, they carried a small, inflatable raft along the twisting course of a secluded tributary, the current slow but steady, the water shimmering with reflected light and broken only by the occasional ripple of salmon leaping beneath the surface. The air smelled of wet earth, pine resin, and the faint salt tang of the nearby coast, blending with the warm musk of early summer. Marcus, taller and broader than Ethan, guided the boat to the riverbank, pulling it onto wet rocks to prepare fishing lines and hooks. He laid out salmon scraps near the edge to entice the fish, ignoring the occasional splash of water that sent droplets skimming across his sleeves. Ethan leaned back slightly in the raft, scanning the tree line for movement, familiar with the sudden, silent shifts that wildlife could make along these dense banks. They were confident in their experience, aware of the island's bears, but accustomed to respecting distance and maintaining vigilance. Yet in their familiarity, they did not anticipate the raw intensity of nature that awaited them that morning. From the dense shadow of spruce and alder, a massive Kodiak bear emerged, its brown fur gleaming with early sunlight, and its hulking form nearly blending with the dark green of the forest floor. The bear had been drawn by the scent of salmon scraps left on the rocks, and its eyes glinted with calculated focus, nostrils flaring as it sniffed the air and gauged its surroundings. The animal circled slowly at first, growling low, the sound vibrating through the moist air, pawing at the riverbank as it assessed both prey and obstacle. Marcus noticed the movement, the sudden shift in the forest's rhythm, and instinctively froze, heart pounding, realizing that the bear's interest was fixed entirely on him and the scraps at his feet. He moved cautiously backward, trying to retreat into the inflatable, but the rocks were slick with river moisture, and his footing betrayed him. One wet stone shifted under his boot, sending him stumbling forward into a precarious position, and in that split second, the bear lunged with terrifying speed. Its massive paws struck with bone-jarring force, sending Marcus crashing into the edge of the raft and scattering gear into the river. Fishing lines, tackle boxes, and remnants of the morning's preparations flew into the current, tumbling and spinning downstream. Pain seared through Marcus's shoulder and ribs as he tried to regain balance, but the bear's strength was relentless, each swipe and push crushing resistance with the inevitability of raw power. Ethan, momentarily frozen in shock, dove toward the raft as the bear continued to paw and swipe at the bank, snapping at scraps and overturned gear. The friends' years of shared summers and experience in the wilderness offered little protection against the feral intensity of a Kodiak in full predatory drive. Marcus, disoriented and struggling, attempted to pull himself into the raft, but the bear's strike sent him tumbling into the cold, churning river. The water closed over his head in a violent rush, dragging him downstream, battering him against submerged rocks and the overturned boat. Shock and exhaustion stole his strength. The river's current, swift and merciless, carried him beyond Ethan's reach before he could regain control. The river's cruel murmur replaced the sound of rushing water and the bear's low growls as Marcus sank below the surface, his struggles growing weaker with each passing moment. Ethan clung desperately to the overturned inflatable, bruised, trembling, and watching helplessly as the river swallowed his friend. The bear, having satisfied its curiosity and hunger, eventually retreated to the tree line, its massive form vanishing into the undergrowth, leaving behind only the destruction of the morning's encounter. Debris littered the riverbank, the raft partially deflated, fishing gear scattered and broken, personal items ripped from their containers, all mingled with trampled vegetation and flattened undergrowth. Ethan's breath came in ragged, shuddering bursts as he pressed himself to the side of the raft, numbly assessing the chaos and loss, each second stretching unbearably while he waited for rescue. Hours passed like minutes until the distant sound of a ranger's motorboat reached his ears. Trained in emergency response, the ranger guided Ethan to safety, helping him climb from the frigid water onto the bank, where blankets and medical attention awaited. But the river had already claimed Marcus. Search efforts recovered his body several hundred meters downstream, battered, disoriented, and tragically unable to withstand the shock of cold water and the relentless current. Emergency responders noted the bear tracks leading away from the scene, confirming the encounter had been sudden, predatory, and terrifyingly close. Authorities later emphasized the dangers of leaving food exposed in Kodiak's wilderness, reinforcing that even the most experienced outdoors people could fall victim to the raw unpredictability of nature. The incident became a somber reminder of how quickly routine excursions into remote areas could turn catastrophic, and how even friends who knew the land and its creatures intimately could not always predict or prevent disaster. Rangers suggested strict adherence to food storage protocols, constant vigilance near riverbanks, and maintaining distance from any bear that approached, no matter how accustomed to human presence it might appear. Ethan carried the trauma for months after. Every summer memory of fishing trips, campfires, and river explorations tinged with the loss of Marcus. The river itself, once a symbol of freedom and friendship, became a place of cautious reverence, each bend and rapid a reminder of July 29th, 2020, when experience and knowledge had been powerless against a single moment of unpredictable nature. Friends, family, and local authorities revisited safety measures. Still, for Ethan, the day remained vividly alive. The shimmer of the river, the massive form of the Kodiak emerging from the forest, the sudden chaos, and the ultimate heartbreak of watching a lifelong friend lost to a force both majestic and merciless. Kodiak Island's rivers remained as beautiful and abundant as ever. Still, the story of Marcus Hale's final summer would echo through the forest and streams, a chilling lesson on the fragility of human control in the face of untamed wildlife. The morning of August 15, 2007, began crisp and clear in northern Wyoming, the sky pale blue above jagged granite cliffs rising sharply from dense pine valleys, their dark boughs swaying gently in the wind that carried the scent of frost and distant wildflowers. Climbers Jason Whitman and his longtime friend Ethan Riley had planned this remote ascent for months, drawn by the isolation and challenge of granite faces untouched by frequent visitors. Each step along the rocky slope was measured, every rope placement deliberate, as they navigated a narrow ridge twisting above the valley below. The sun struck the stone at a low angle, glinting off jagged edges and sending shadows into crevices where moss clung stubbornly. Jason paused near a slender ledge to adjust his harness and check his ropes, focused entirely on carabiners and straps, unaware of a disturbance far below. Several miles down the slope, a campsite had left scraps of food that carried faintly on the wind, reaching the keen senses of a large grizzly roaming the pine valleys. Drawn by hunger and curiosity, the bear moved silently through the forest, climbing over fallen logs and loose boulders with speed and stealth until it reached the ridge where Jason now crouched. Ethan climbed cautiously, scanning the cliffside for loose stone. A subtle tension in the air made him uneasy, the rustle of pine needles and scrape of stone faint against the wind, yet heavy with an unfamiliar menace. Jason did not notice the shadow moving closer along the rock face, nor the low growl vibrating through the stone. Suddenly, the bear emerged with terrifying speed. Its massive frame surged up the slope, muscles rippling beneath coarse brown fur, claws gripping rock and dislodging small stones. Jason looked up just in time to see the hulking grizzly charging directly toward him. Instinct flared, but the ledge offered little room for retreat. He attempted to step back, but his boot slipped on loose granite. The rock shifted, sending his balance into a fatal miscalculation. The bear struck with astonishing force. Its shoulder slammed into Jason's torso, spinning him sideways, and his body toppled over the ledge, tumbling uncontrollably down the cliffside. Rocks tore at his clothing and skin, each bounce and impact searing pain through limbs and spine. His helmet struck jagged stone repeatedly as he plunged downward, the air rushing past his ears in a chaotic roar that mingled with the grizzly's distant growls. Ethan, frozen in shock, instinctively reached forward but realized immediately that the terrain made any pursuit impossible. The slope was steep, scattered with loose rock, and plunged into a ravine widening as Jason disappeared. Panic and adrenaline surged, but all Ethan could do was mark the location and wait for rescue teams to arrive. The grizzly, having satisfied its curiosity, retreated into the forest, its massive form fading among the trees. Rangers arrived hours later, navigating the treacherous slopes using ropes and harnesses to examine debris across the rock. They found Jason's body at the base of the cliff, his fall having caused blunt trauma compounded by exposure. His helmet lay cracked, ropes and climbing gear torn or scattered, carabiners and chalk bags crushed under boulders. The bear had vanished entirely into the wilderness, leaving only flattened vegetation and the occasional claw mark gouged into softer stone. Authorities reviewed the site and issued warnings for climbers in remote Wyoming wilderness areas. Never climb alone, always secure food, and remain vigilant for wildlife, particularly grizzly populations. The accident underscored the fragility of human control in areas where nature maintained dominance. where years of experience could be nullified in an instant by a combination of terrain, instinct, and unpredictability. Even careful planning could not mitigate every risk when cliffs, loose rock, and wild predators were involved. Ethan carried the memory of August 15th, 2007, like a weight pressing on his chest. The cliffside, once a symbol of challenge, became inseparable from the violent impact of the bear and the helplessness of watching a friend vanish into a ravine. Rescue teams had documented the scene, yet no report could capture the emotional shock or the visceral awareness that the wilderness, though familiar, held power humans could not fully tame. The jagged cliffs still towered above the valleys, indifferent, surfaces glinting in the sun as if nothing had occurred. Scattered gear, marks of the bear, and the memory of Jason Whitman's final moments remained a somber testament to the risk of remote climbing. Even the most skilled, most prepared climbers could fall victim to terrain, wildlife, and a single misstep, a lesson written starkly across the granite face and etched into the minds of those who had witnessed it. On the morning of March 9, 2024, pale winter sunlight stretched across the tundra of Svalbard, glinting off jagged icebergs and distant glaciers that rose like jagged spires from the snow-blanketed landscape. A group of 4 adventure tourists navigated the treacherous ice on snowmobiles, cameras strapped to their bodies, intent on capturing the stark beauty of the Arctic wilderness. The wind cut sharply across the open terrain, biting through layers of clothing, and each breath created a cloud of mist in the frigid air. The vast expanse was both breathtaking and deceptive, a frozen plain that offered stunning views while concealing dangers that could strike in an instant. Guide Lars Henriksen, a veteran of polar expeditions, had warned the tourists about polar bear sightings, stressing that the openness of the tundra could make visibility tricky, and that these predators could appear without warning. The group moved cautiously, snowmobiles crunching across packed ice, engine vibrations echoing faintly against distant cliffs of frozen snow. Their route traced along a ridge that sloped gently toward a frozen fjord where massive icebergs drifted lazily in the icy water below. Despite their attention to safety, the scent of food and fuel stored in one snowmobile's rear compartment carried faintly in the still Arctic air, an invisible lure for any predator wandering nearby. From the ridge, a massive polar bear emerged, its white fur blending partially with the snow, but its dark eyes and immense bulk revealing its presence unmistakably. It moved with deliberate intent, powerful limbs pressing against the ice with quiet authority, sniffing the air as it drew closer. The tourists first noticed movement only when the bear's silhouette grew larger against the pale sky, and a sudden, low rumble of breath or growl carried faintly across the ice. The group froze momentarily, realizing that the predator had singled out their closest snowmobile. Anna Svensson, the rider nearest to the bear, instinctively accelerated, gripping the handles tightly as the snowmobile skidded across uneven ice. Her heart pounded with fear, the cold air burning her cheeks as she tried to gain distance. But the polar bear struck with astonishing speed, swiping at the trailing snowmobile with its massive paw, claws scraping against the metal frame. The impact tipped the vehicle violently, throwing Anna into the icy surface with a bone-jarring collision. Pain exploded through her ribs and shoulders as she slid across the tundra. The wind knocked from her lungs, snow biting into bruised skin. The other riders reacted instantly, engines roaring as they sped backward, kicking up clouds of snow that partially obscured the bear's view. Lars Henriksen, keeping his composure despite the sudden danger, reached for flares and noisemakers stored in a pack, firing them toward the bear to create chaos and draw its attention away from the group. The bright light and deafening noise startled the predator, forcing it to pause, but it did not retreat immediately. Instead, it prowled closer, pawing at the ice and snapping at gear left near the fallen snowmobile, tearing straps, boxes, and cameras as if testing each obstacle for weakness. Anna struggled to rise, her body aching, ribs sharp and bruised, each breath a reminder of the bear's sudden strike. Lars guided her behind another snowmobile, urging the others to maintain a safe perimeter while keeping the predator's attention diverted. The bear swiped again at gear and overturned equipment near the edge of the ridge, shredding supplies and scattering personal items across the ice. Despite its size, its movements were precise, driven by curiosity and hunger. testing both the human's nerve and the vulnerability of their machinery. After several tense minutes that stretched like hours across the frozen landscape, the polar bear finally retreated, moving back toward the distant ridge from which it had emerged. Its massive form blended once more into the snow, leaving behind a trail of destruction. Broken straps, overturned boxes, scattered equipment, and deep claw marks etched into the ice where the snowmobiles had skidded. The tourists, hearts still racing, gathered near Lars, checking each other for injuries and assessing the damage. Anna, though shaken and bruised, managed to sit up, every movement sending jolts of pain through her chest and ribs, a constant reminder of how quickly calm could turn to chaos in the Arctic. Authorities later emphasized the critical importance of maintaining strict distance from wildlife and securing all food and fuel during polar expeditions. Even the most experienced guides and prepared tourists were vulnerable to the speed and strength of a predator like a polar bear, and careless storage or distraction could lead to dangerous encounters. In the aftermath of March 9, 2024, the lesson was clear. The tundra, while breathtaking and starkly beautiful, held dangers that demanded vigilance, respect, and preparation beyond what many travelers assumed possible. The tundra returned to its quiet, pale stillness soon after, the glaciers standing like silent sentinels, and the icebergs drifting untroubled in the fjord below. Yet the memories of that morning remained vivid for the group. The sudden emergence of the bear, the overwhelming sense of power in its movements, the shattering crash of Anna's snowmobile, and the tense moments where survival depended on instinct, courage, and quick thinking. The wind carried the faint scent of ice and snow, but also the invisible reminder of vulnerability, the knowledge that even in broad, open spaces, humans were never fully in control. For Anna Svensson, the Arctic encounter became a lasting scar on memory and body alike. Broken ribs, deep bruises, and the psychological imprint of a predator striking without warning. For Lars and the others, it became a stark lesson in preparation, awareness, and respect for the wild, where beauty and danger existed in a delicate, precarious balance. The tundra, indifferent to human presence, remained an expanse of breathtaking isolation, its silence a haunting counterpoint to the roar and chaos of March 9, 2024, a day when nature's raw power made itself unmistakably known. The morning of September 22, 2023, dawned crisp and golden over the Oregon Cascades, sunlight filtering through the canopy of red, orange, and yellow leaves that painted the forest in the colors of early fall. Friends Maya Thompson and Leah Carter moved along a remote hiking trail, the soft rustle of leaves beneath their boots blending with the occasional distant call of birds and the whisper of wind through the trees. Maya, eager to capture the vibrancy of the season, spotted a moss-covered boulder jutting slightly above the trail. She paused, backpack set carefully on the ground a few feet behind her, and crouched close to the boulder, raising her phone for a selfie, unaware that a predator observed from the shadows. The forest, alive with shifting light and muted sounds, seemed tranquil, yet the faint scent of food from Maya's backpack carried subtly on the breeze, unnoticed by the hikers, but detected instantly by a black bear moving silently in the underbrush. Its dark eyes glinted as it crept forward, muscles coiled beneath glossy fur, paws pressing softly against the damp forest floor, ears flicking with keen awareness. The bear had been drawn by the irresistible aroma of snacks and the subtle disruption of human presence in its territory, approaching with the deliberate patience of a wild animal assessing both opportunity and threat. Maya, focused entirely on her camera, did not sense the movement until the bear was nearly upon her. The sudden appearance was violent and immediate. The bear lunged without warning, claws extended, its weight propelling it forward with speed and precision that left little time for reaction. Maya stumbled backward instinctively, twisting her ankle against a root hidden beneath fallen leaves, the sharp pain momentarily staggering her as the bear swiped at her legs. Pain exploded across her lower limbs as claws raked her jeans and skin, tearing through fabric and leaving deep lacerations. Leah's heart jumped into her throat, panic rising with each guttural growl that reverberated through the forest. Without hesitation, she raised her trekking pole and slammed it against the trunk of a nearby tree, the sound echoing sharply and startling the bear. For a brief, tense moment, the animal hesitated, growling low and circling, testing the human reaction, its dark eyes flicking between the injured hiker and the sudden threat. The disruption gave Leah just enough leverage to step toward Maya, urging her to retreat backward while keeping the bear's attention divided. The bear swiped again, powerful limbs shaking the air and striking at anything near its path. Maya's backpack toppled over, scattering snacks and a water bottle across the leaf-strewn trail, remnants of her earlier carelessness now serving as bait and distraction. She pressed herself as far from the bear as possible, wincing as each movement sent sharp jolts of pain through her twisted ankle and freshly clawed legs. Leah continued to strike poles against trees and stomp, using every ounce of energy to keep the bear at bay. For several long minutes, the predator tested the situation, sniffing at scattered food, swiping at fallen debris, and circling cautiously, assessing the risk of confrontation. Eventually, the bear retreated, disappearing back into the thick underbrush with fluid, almost silent movements, leaving behind the bruised and bleeding Maya and a trembling Leah. The forest returned to its deceptive calm, the rustle of leaves and distant bird calls masking the violence that had unfolded moments before. Maya sank onto a low rock, clutching her legs, feeling the ache of deep bruises and the sting of lacerations that cut across her calves and shins. Blood had soaked through her clothing, leaving vivid streaks against the autumn foliage. Leah knelt beside her, checking for further injuries and pressing makeshift padding against the worst wounds. Her own scrapes minor, but a constant reminder of the close encounter. The trail, once serene and inviting, now felt dangerous and alien. Every snapped twig or shifting shadow carried the weight of memory, a heightened awareness that even short distractions like taking photos could provoke wildlife attacks in areas where bears were active. Maya's camera lay forgotten among scattered leaves and toppled gear, a small, silent testament to the moment when curiosity and routine had collided with the raw unpredictability of nature. Authorities later emphasized the need for vigilance on hiking trails, particularly in bear country. Keeping food secured, maintaining awareness of surroundings, and avoiding unnecessary distractions were critical measures to prevent encounters. Even experienced hikers could underestimate the speed and force of a bear, and an instant of inattention could result in serious injury, as had occurred on the morning of September 22, 2023. The Oregon Cascades, beautiful and inviting, held dangers inherent in wilderness life, where human caution and respect were the only reliable safeguards against powerful predators. Maya and Leah eventually made it back to a ranger station, bruised, bandaged, and shaken. Their hike ended by an event they would remember vividly for the rest of their lives. The memory of the bear's lunging charge, the tearing claws, the sudden pain, and the adrenaline-fueled scramble for safety became etched into their minds. The autumn colors remained stunning, yet every tree, every boulder, every rustle of leaves held a sharp edge of caution. Nature's beauty was inseparable from its danger, a lesson reinforced in the Arctic clarity of the Cascades' cool, crisp air. For Maya, the experience left not only physical scars, but a lasting psychological imprint. The moment of distraction that had seemed innocuous in her excitement became a stark reminder of vulnerability in the wilderness. Leah, too, carried the memory of proximity to death and the sharp awareness that human presence in wild areas was always temporary, conditional, and precarious. The forest, indifferent to human plans or enthusiasm, had asserted its dominance with terrifying efficiency, teaching the two friends that survival often depended on vigilance, quick reaction, and respect for the unpredictable instincts of wildlife.